All right, Improvisation Center is back again with the FMT, the Ford muscle truck, and this is probably going to be our last assembly video before we actually go ahead and get ready to crank this thing up. There's a few little things that I have to do. As you can see, we got us a carburetor sitting right here waiting to be put on. I took time to take care of some boring shit like putting on the fan clutch and the pulley right there, as well as plugging up the alternator. Small stuff that I wouldn't even care to bore you with. But because we're not going to have a smog pump on here, which would have went down there, I got to get a shorter belt, serpentine belt, than the stock one, so we could reroute it around everything minus the smog pump. Also, we got our throttle cable we got to hook up to the carburetor. More than likely, I'm going to need to get a shorter one of these too. We'll figure it out though. Let's see, what else do we got here? Heater hoses, going to have to hook those up. These are clearly not long enough, so have to get some more heater hose for that. Then there's a couple small things like the sender units for the water and oil pressure. Have to hook those up. We actually have the lines right here. Took care of that in a previous video before when we were in the dash trying to get all that stuff wired up ahead of time. Also need to bleed the clutch master cylinder, which is right there, so our clutch will work, so whenever we do get this thing running, we'll be able to actually operate the transmission like we're supposed to. Then the last thing we need to do, the biggest thing obviously, is putting a distributor in right there. And we actually have a lot of that crap on hand waiting to go in. Got our HEI hybrid distributor. Uses a GM HEI system, distributor cap with the coil on top, but it's a Ford distributor. A lot more convenient than using a DuraSpark or any other stock Ford hardware. So we're putting that in. Got our wires here. Also have our air cleaner right there with a fresh element in it. Got some oil, all that good shit. Other little thing, just gotta jump her out this plug right here where our dual fuel switch used to be, but is no longer. So we'll be able to get power to the fuel pump. And obviously with the fuel pump, I have to get a line from here up to the carburetor so the carburetor can get fuel. And lastly, we need a battery. So once we get all that in, we should actually be ready to crank this thing up. So go ahead and start getting all this stuff, this final stuff, put together. All right, on our throttle cable here, I actually removed the stock throttle cable and replaced it with this short piece right here that came from another car. Don't know where the hell it came from because I pulled stuff off of so many cars and saved the parts that I didn't keep track of it. But anyway, this is a shorter cable. In order to hold it in, I did have to fabricate a little bracket right there with an ankle brace that was slit to fit over the cable as I put it in there. I had to enlarge the hole right there enough to fit the whole thing in there, and then put that bracket over it and use the stock bolt holes from the old cable. So all that's in there. It's hooked up to the pedal inside. Only thing I got to do now is fabricate a bracket to go right there on the intake in order to hold the cable at that point right there. And to do that, I took an ankle brace, an old ankle brace out of our stock, and chopped it up, made it to fit in the stud right there and be able to attach to the little anchor point on the cable. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that shit put on. Got that on. Now I just got to find something to provide a little anchor point for the tip of the throttle cable. I'll be back. All right, got our throttle cable set up, done. What I ended up doing, because on here, normally there's a little clip that goes on there to go around a ball tip on the throttle linkage of a carburetor. Since we don't have a ball tip on here, I went ahead, took the clip off, drilled the thing all the way through, took a small bolt, or really a screw, put it on the carb linkage here, retained it with one nut, slid the tip of the throttle cable over that, retained it with another nut. I'll probably go ahead and put some super glue on this so the nut doesn't walk off under normal use. Also have our return spring right there, so that's straight. Everything else is obviously straight. The ankle brace that's holding the cable assembly on, the bracket over there, all that good shit. Also, the next thing I'm going to end up doing, I decided to go ahead and do, is add another fuel filter right after the fuel pump instead of up here by the carburetor, because we got our fuel line right here, and have it added all the way up to there with extra tubing and a small spot right here where I would have put a fuel filter, but because we're right there by the exhaust manifold, not a good place to put plastic anything, so I'll just go ahead and leave this as is. I mean, yeah, you got a rubber hose up there, but that's fuel line. That fuel line's more likely to withstand a little bit of heat than the little cheap plastic fuel filters. So anyway, I'll put a fuel filter down there right by the fuel pump, and all this shit here will be straight. And with that, our fuel system will be technically finished completely. All right, see if we can get our focus in here. We got our fuel filter in, extra fuel filter that is, right after the pump, as you can see. Didn't really have to do anything special. All I had to do was just disconnect the fuel line ahead of the fuel pump and just push it forward to make space for the fuel filter and the extra little piece of hose, and put everything in. I did use a zip tie, as you can see, a little green zip tie right there to secure the fuel line to a old bracket there in order to keep everything from rattling around. So that's secured. So we're good on the whole fuel system. Actually, I remembered one little thing. I still have to put a jumper in on the fuel selector switch plug so we can get power to the fuel pump when we turn the key on at all times. That'll be a minor thing to do. Just have to get a battery in there in order to get power where we need it so we can get our jumper in. So that'll be next. Actually had a change of plan with regard to our fuel selector switch. Going back to the idea that this was a computer controlled truck, the computer is technically still in play, especially on the fuel circuit, and meaning that the simple idea of turning the key on to try to get fuel will only partially work, because the computer, under normal circumstances, when you turn the key on, cycles a fuel pump for a couple seconds to prime the EFI system, allowing you to crank the thing and start up. And then once the thing detects the engine's running, it'll run the pump all the time. So since we're not running an EFI system, we need to do some fuckery, really. Not too much, but the point also being that I'm probably going to put this fuel switch, selector switch, back in. But getting back to the fuckery, basically taking a wire, an extra wire, tapping into a 12-volt source that comes on only with the key, and tapping it into the output line going to essentially the relay for the fuel pump because we don't want to jump route the relay. Otherwise, it's going to be on all the time, even with the key off. So we're just going to partially use the original system to do this crap. But the line I picked was a circuit right here. Got a line plugged in there with a terminal, and it comes up right here, and it's going to be spliced into that wire to feed 12-volt power all the way to the fuel pump, well, to the relay to cycle it on when the key comes on. But the reason I picked that line right there is because that circuit is actually for the transmission control, which obviously we don't need anymore. So it won't, oh, Jesus, we won't need that circuit anymore because, well, we don't have a computer controlled automatic transmission in here. So it'll be just fine to tap into that circuit. So that is that. Yeah. Anyway, the other reason that I decided to keep our selector switch is because it's kind of like an extra security measure. Turn the truck off, turn the thing over to rear. We know there's no rear gas tank in here. So if somebody did try to steal this thing and didn't know any better, they'll just crank and crank and crank and get no effect at all. So, like I said, extra security measure. Of course, it wouldn't be the only one, but it is one that I'll use. And it'll still at least kind of keep some semblance of normalcy on the dash panel because, well, you got a fuel selector switch. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and put all this shit together. Like I said, the last thing I'm going to have to do in the wiring department is figure out the starting setup because for shits and giggles, I tried to crank the thing with the key and got nothing. No power at the solenoid either. Hey, shut up. But, got no power at the solenoid, so I'm going to have to figure that out at the ignition switch under there and that spaghetti bowl of crap right there coming from the ignition switch. So after I get this dash put back together, I'll go ahead and slide up under there and take care of that as well. So the work continues and the noise continues. We got our panel back on, the switch in place. I did just realize too that regardless of where the switch is at, the pump is going to always come on. As you could hear, pump is going to always come on regardless of whether we're in forward or reverse because of that jumper wire that we put in. No big deal. It's a lot better to have the switch in place anyway. Better than having a big hole in the dash. So turn that shit off. Don't want to burn our pump up. So that part is done. Now get to the starting circuit. All right, finally got the starter circuit situation figured out. Apparently there's some hidden fuckery in the circuit that I had to kind of pinpoint. Couldn't really address it because once you get deep into these wire bundles, you either got the option of tearing shit really badly apart or just bypassing it. And because we don't want to butcher anything anymore than we already have, we just bypass stuff. But we try to do it as neatly as possible, of course. Apparently somebody had already been in here before playing around, so much so that they had this wire here that was from the old circuit with a splice that was hooked up right here. And this line here feeding up is essentially dead. After doing a lot of ohming out of sections of wire, I came to the wire loom right there and more or less found that between this plug junction right there, there's like a 500 ohm resistance reading on a simple wire junction or at the plug, whichever. Either way it goes, we can't have that because resistance means extra current. Extra current means burnt up wires. Can't have that. So we ended up just bypassing that segment of circuit. And there's a wire right there. See it right here. That little wire right there is our bypass. And it's going right here. Neatly ran over the top of the framework, the little subframe or whatever the hell you want to call it that holds the steering column and all that shit. And it's hooked up to the wire right here going to the ignition switch. So we bypassed a lot of questionable area. Now coming out here where I pointed out that wire in there, we get to a spot where the sun's not gonna blind you. Coming further in here, ran the wire along this bundle here where I was actually trying to trace a lot of this crap, and ended up splicing right here into a section of wire. Now I spliced this section first because that was where I had the last meter reading where it confirmed that it went back to the solenoid. Now, weird thing is, when I tried it, we didn't get any effect. At first I thought that this fuse block right here, this fuse right here, was shown to be the one for the starter relay. It was blown. I replaced it. Still didn't get any action. Now, as a result, I ended up bypassing that shit yet again at that point, skipping around over to here and splicing it on this section of wire here where it further goes down to our our starter relay. And that pretty much is the gist of the whole bypass situation. Now, as far as this fuse is concerned right here, in the process of trying to figure out what was up with this wiring right here, I actually put the meter on here to see if power was showing up anywhere on this fuse block when I hit the key. No power showed up here, so I don't know what the hell's going on in here, and I'm not tearing this apart for one little circuit because I might end up compromising something else in here, which we don't want to do. Automotive electrical sucks, especially when you're talking about old automotive electrical. So we just did the bypass, single wire coming from the ignition switch, going through the firewall over to these points, connecting up to a point, going to the starter relay. And as far as this is concerned, you hear our fuel pump again, and well, the battery is dead, but I'm sure you probably heard the clicking of the relay and the slight cranking of the starter trying to do something. We are on a relatively dead battery, so I just needed the 12 volts to be able to test all this crap more so than actually trying to be able to crank the thing. But knowing that we got everything situated where it is, I could put all this other shit back together under here. I could put all this, neaten it up a little bit, zip ties, put the panel back on, and we can write off that part of the setup. All right. Went to the junkyard, picked us up a smog pump, and some little bitty hoses like that right there. And now we can get ready to actually put all this shit together, get our serpentine belt on as well. I did take the time, obviously, from what you see, to actually put all our heater hoses on, like this one right here. Had to find a metal tubing that could be snaked around. Well, it's not bent. I mean, it's already bent, but it allows me to get this little short piece of hose right here to attach to the water pump right here. Another dumbass design. Thanks, Ford. But use the metal tubing. I had to use some super heavy zip ties to help hold it nice and sturdy against it, because when the belt's running up against here, it's dangerously close to the hoses and shit. Just like this hose right here being dangerously close to a moving fan. Again, another dumbass design. Anyway, well, it's not really a dumbass design because there's supposed to be a fan shroud there, so yeah, let me rescind that comment. But anyway, took the stock heater hose right here, shortened it, put the metal tube in, took another length of heater hose that I had that was long enough to reach from back there down to a port on the back of the intake, and we have our brake booster air line attached to the back of the carburetor. So with all that taken care of, our cooling system is, for all intents, done. Now, smog pump time. Have to slide up under here and attach it to this point right there where you see the big old empty slot. So I'll slide up under here, bolt this shit up, get our belt on. All right, with everything else done, smog pump in and all, I'm gonna go ahead and put the distributor in. In order to do that, I had to turn the engine over manually with a ratchet wrench. You can see the thing on there, kind of about right there, but anyway, it's on the crank pulley. Slowly turning it around to get it to where it's top dead center on number 1 cylinder. For you Ford guys, you'll know number 1 is that one right there. Not like GM, Chevy, where it's right there. Anyway, got it set. Now, I just put this distributor in. Make sure to get it where I want number 1 to be. Then get our power wires hooked up to it. Put that valve cover back. Well, now I'll leave the valve cover off for the time being, just in case. But I will need to get the wires on. Once I do that, then we can start wrapping up everything in preparation to crank this thing. So let's keep moving. Okay, on these HEI distributors, when you're doing such a hybrid setup, such as what we're doing with a Ford, small block Ford engine, there's a few things you got to make note of. You can't just put this distributor in any position, mind you, because, well, these intake runners right here, especially if you're using an aftermarket manifold, are high. They're going to get in the way because this distributor is wide as hell. But conveniently, they put a spot right here that's more or less indented, I guess is a good word for it, because right where my hand is at is where that indent is. I could be able to put this thing in here most of the way. You can see right here where it's almost seated all the way, and right here is where that indent is. But as you can see, we still have some resistance right here. This little area is not seating all the way. Have to work it down. I tried it before, but we'll do this for demonstration purposes. But I'm gonna have to whittle away a little bit of this area right here on the intake. Just a small bit of metal, nothing special, just enough to allow this thing to go down like literally 1/4 of an inch more so it could seat all the way in. And then with that, I'll be able to have that swing to time it and still be able to get everything else put together as intended. So go ahead, whittle away at this metal here. Not much now. And then we get our distributor set down. There we go. As we can see, zoom in right there. We are nice and seated up against the bottom. Well, not the bottom, but on the top of the block right there. And got perfect clearance right here. As you can see, we are more or less good to go on this thing. Don't have a whole lot of swing though. One thing I probably will end up doing is removing this little sensor right here, because this is in the way as far as temperature sensor. I really don't need this shit. So I could take this out, take this whole setup out and just put a pipe plug in here, and that way I'll have a little more swing with the diaphragm right there. So for all intents and purposes, well, hell, really, if I get the timing set good enough, I probably won't need too much of a swing anyway, but we'll still get that out nonetheless. So with that, we can put our cap on, put our wires on, and get the power lines running to this shit, and wrap up that part of the setup. All right, got everything hooked up for the Dizzy here. as you can see, we've got plug wires in. We got our other wires here going back to the cab for the tachometer and the power feeding the distributor and all its hardware. As you can see, the spark plug wires are super long, and that's usually because these universal plug wire sets tend to be longer than necessary. I guess that's a good thing because it gives you a little bit of room for error, but most of us who are really particular will try to either make custom wires like I've done before where they're made to length, or trim these down to where they'll fit better, so when we secure the wires on either side with zip ties like roadkill or with the actual wire clamps, everything will be nice and neat without extra wire flopping all over, as we could see all over this thing. But because we're not even done with this thing as far as getting it running and tuned and all that, I'm gonna leave all this shit alone, because I don't want to go through that extra effort and then find out I gotta tear stuff apart again. That would suck. So we're gonna stick with the Spider for right now, and once we get the thing running, confirmed, tuned where we need it to be, then I can address the wires as far as lengths and all that shit. The only other issue that concerns me is with the power line feeding the distributor. Since this wire is more than likely coming off of the ECU, which played in with how the fuel system works, I'm gonna have to probably take a couple measurements, see what the voltage is coming out of it, to determine if that power might be already regulated with some type of ballast resistor at the ECU, or if it's just raw 12 volts that would have been regulated by the EEC4 module that was on the distributor that used to be in the engine that used to be in this truck. Hopefully it's just a raw 12 volt feed, because all the HEI stuff is internally regulated as far as ballast resistors and all that. You just need to get power to it. But we'll find that out when we're in our advanced stages as far as getting ready to start this thing. But now, for all intents, the ignition system is done, so we can finally get to bleeding the clutch master cylinder. All right, we're finally getting to the clutch master cylinder. It is similar to the brake master cylinder. You can see them both right here. Operates on the same process, pumping oil, pressurizing oil, and that pressurized oil operates a piston downstream. In this case, we're operating a slave cylinder on the transmission. It pushes against the throwout bearing, which pushes against the clutch. And just like a brake system, you got to bleed these things. You got to open up a little Zerk fitting on the slave cylinder to let out air while somebody applies pressure on the clutch pedal to keep the oil and whatever air is in the line under pressure. Do it a few times as necessary to make sure you work all the air out of the system, and verify that your pedal ain't super spongy or anything, and that you're actually getting some clutch action in this case. So with all that, we're going to get this crap started. I'm going to slide underneath. My partner here is going to go ahead and get inside and pump the pedal per my instructions. So let's get this shit going. Are you ready? Yeah, pump it some. Here, hold it down.
It's not coming back up.
It's not going to. You got to make it come back up at this point. But I did let some air out.
Until we get this thing bleed out.
You can pump it again.
Starting to come up on its own now.
Uh-huh. Hold it down. Yeah. That was a shit ton of air there. Thing spat all over. Do it again.
Why didn't it come back up? it really work?
Nope.
Are you kidding me?
Hold it down. What does the pedal do now?
Stay down.
We'll pull it back up and pump it. How's it seem to be acting now?
Coming back up.
Does it feel like it's getting harder?
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for. I'll do it one more time. Pump it some more. All right, hold it down. Didn't get no air that time. Pump the pedal a few times and hold it down.
Like some pitmobile.
Hold it down. All right, see what it's doing now.
Got soft this time.
It should not be soft. It should have some resistance to it.
No, it does not.
Well, I need to see if there's oil in the cylinder. Okay, pump it again and then hold it down.
Oh, you said hold it down.
Hold it down. Okay, see how it does.
Oh, I can't get it up.
Huh?
I can't get the pedal back up. There we go. Would you shut up?
And do it again. Hold it down. All right, try it. See how it is now.
Still have to use my foot to get back up. There we go. Yeah. Coming up on its own now. Somewhat.
Yeah, but I'm getting some clutch action here. Yeah, we're getting clutch action.
What's that?
The clutch is moving when you pump it. I think we got it.
Huh?
I said I think we got it.
That's good?
Yeah. As you can see, folks, after a few cycles of pumping, bleeding, having to refill the reservoir with some fresh oil, and doing a little more pumping and bleeding to verify that we got all the air out. As you can see, the first couple of times we had some spit up action from the initial bubbles of air that came out. Once that was taken care of and we just kept getting straight oil, went ahead and took a look in there, and we saw some clutch action when the pedal was being pumped. So I will have to say this puppy is done. So with that, that's all it is to bleeding a clutch master cylinder and a slave cylinder by default, the whole clutch system. Just like a brake system, only one time though, compared to 4. So with that, I'm going to get out from underneath this thing. Would be this one right here. Then we got number 4. Then number 2. Then number 6. Let's see, where are you at? Number 6. There you are, number 6. Then number 3. Where are you at, number 3? Come here, you. Get you right there, number 3. Then number 7. Wait a minute. Where are you at? There you are, number 7. Last but not least, number 8. And go ahead and plug our power wires back. Put our spark plug back. Okay, now let's try this shit again. I'm gonna stand to the side just to be safe. Try again. Try it again. Oh. Had a little fireball. Motherfucker. Had a little fireball there, but actually that's a good sign because it means we are getting fire. Back it off a little bit. Might need to move the wires some more. Try it again. Okay. So when I turn here, that means I'm going to have to move all these wires one spot over. Been there and done that. Let's verify everything. We got 1. So we are correct again. We just moved it a little bit. Let's see if we can make noise. That was good. Let's do a little tweak. Try it again. Probably gonna have to move it up some more. I'm still way out of time, but I see a lot of good shit going on here. First of all, the engine runs. Number 2, it makes oil pressure because there's oil everywhere. That's a good thing. That means we're throwing oil up where we need it to be. So, for all intents and purposes, what I'm gonna need to do next is put the valve cover back on, bump this distributor back around again a little, well, not the distributor, move these wires one more notch over and try to get this distributor kind of in a middle zone so I'll have some wiggle room, and then we'll try this shit again. Got our valve cover back on. We got our wires bumped yet again. Let's see what kind of fire we can make. Try it again. Try it again. Stand by. Try it again. 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 Let me set the idle a little bit. And tweak this other shit. Okay, try it again. 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 Stand by. Okay, what I'm going to do here, hold the choke partially shut. Try it again. It's a pedal. Like we got action now. Have to hold the choke partially shut. I'm definitely going to have to put a choke cable on here for the time being until I can get an electric choke. But we are running. Definitely going to have to do some tweaking on this thing before I can move any further. And let some of this oil burn off. I know I'm going to have to reseat the gasket on the left valve cover because it's leaking despite being tightened down, or I'm going to have to replace the valve covers. The lips are all warped and fucked up and everything. That's at a later date, but right now, I want this engine running. Open the choke a little bit. Well, we got action here, and smoke, and oil, giving the idea that, like I said, this valve cover is shit. So, I'm going to have to take care of that, along with some tweaking and all, before we can move any further with trying to actually move this thing, because you can't really move anything if you can't keep the engine running, much less keep it running to where it's not going to start on fire. So, yeah, the thing runs. So, you'll see all this other good stuff in the next video when we get back in here and try to clean up all this shit and get everything straight to where we could actually start it under normal circumstances and not have to do things like hold chokes closed and do all other kinds of fuckery in here just to make the engine run a little bit. So, till the next time, hit that like, subscribe if you hadn't already, leave a positive comment, or at least a mild comment so I don't end up being an asshole, and stick around for the next video. So, till the next time, I shall catch you later.